there has to be some sort of a value creation. And the value add for people is very easy. You can now have more podcasts. But for me, always it's about quality over quantity. And I feel that while you can create a podcast as it could be a little bit gimmicky or perhaps a gap filler, the reality is people want to hear real people talking like us.
AI continues to reshape content creation. Many creators face the challenge of balancing efficiency with quality and authenticity. With the rise of tools designed to automate storytelling, the podcasting industry in particular is exploring how AI might support or even disrupt traditional methods. Enter Meta's notebook Llama. It's an open source AI that generates podcast style summaries from uploaded text. And this aims to bring a dynamic, interactive feel to AI generated content. Now, as podcasters, I mean, we've got this. I've got other podcasts on the side. This is both exciting and a little bit nerve wracking. But I have a feeling that we're going into a period with podcasting that we saw with written content when OpenAI launched ChatGPT. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Raj.
As you rightly mentioned, Megan, is the era of automation and AI, where everything literally is going through this automation loop. Bits which are easier, which you taken out first. Writing was easier, so we started working on AI-generated content written. Now, as a content writer yourself, an editor yourself, you understand that it's not as simple as just dropping in some text and creating it. There are implications of using AI content for SEO. Similarly, in every field, whether it's video, audio, podcast, you name it, there's implications of the technology where you can, for example, in this case, develop a podcast by dropping in a PDF file or text, for instance, which is really interesting, but equally, there has to be some sort of a value creation. And the value add for people is very easy. You can now have more podcasts. But for me, always it's about quality over quantity. And I feel that while you can create a podcast as it could be a little bit gimmicky or perhaps a gap filler, the reality is people want to hear real people talking like us. Obviously, we are not AIs. That's what AI would say as well, obviously, one day. But that human element, the human touch is super important. Perhaps you can build the first version of it using AI and then add your human touch to it as I can make it a proper podcast. But it's really exciting to see the innovation happening. Again, it's not only Notebook Llama working on it by Meta, but also there's a Google product called Notebook LM as well, which is super interesting. I actually used it for launch of one of our retreats for EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. We were in Nepal for a retreat, and so we just created one, and people were amazed by how cool the podcast was.
Awesome. I mean, you've mentioned quality over quantity, but I think it also depends on the size of the company, because the same thing with tools like Midjourney, for example, or DALL-E. Large-scale agencies can use it as almost like a proof of concept type of deal, whereas smaller content creators can actually increase their output. How do you think that this is actually going to input the podcasts industry, especially for smaller creators who might use AI for their own content? Are we losing the humanity? How do you see this playing out?
For me, the use case of these podcasts is to explain difficult concepts in a conversational way. So one thing with podcasts do really well is to explain difficult concepts by making it a conversation as opposed to just theoretical reading or just narrating a book. And that's what I think podcasts are really good at. And this is what I saw as well in my experiments, that when I used a podcast to explain a retreat, which was like a 5-day intensive retreat in two people talking, that broke down this in a very human-like fashion. I think for that purpose, this is great. But if we're using it only for the purpose of building content to market and sell, the problem there with this, because that would require authentic user and human touch to it. So you can probably create some elements using these podcast tools like Notebook Llama or Notebook LM, and then add a bit of real human touch to it by playing that bit for a little bit, the podcast bit, and then summarizing that in your own words. I think that's where your opportunity lies. It's a pick and mix, buffet style pick and mix opportunity where you can grab different elements, put them all together. That for me works really well. But purely just the podcast itself, yeah, it's interesting, but the purpose really is to explain different concepts, not just marketing and sales.
Yeah, yeah. Now, one of the biggest challenges is making the voices, the AI voices, sound more real. There's been a lot of debate about voice cloning and all that kind of thing. So there are obviously security implications and safety implications about this as well. But overall, AI voice still is not 100%. Using a tool like Notebook Llama to make AI generated podcasts sound more lively, obviously voices that don't sound natural are going to detract. How far are we from seeing improvements in this arena?
My personal experience with Notebook LM, which is Google's product, was that it was impressive. I haven't done an experimentation with Notebook Llama to give you a definitive answer on the level, but I must say that using 11 Labs and other tools like Runway ML, it already creates some really authentic sounding voice and commentary. I feel that we're not very far from making a very human, realistic sounding, if it's not already there. In my experience, like for example, when I hear the podcast I'm talking about, maybe we should put that in the show notes as well for people to hear. It sounded so authentic that for a second I forgot that I used a AI tool to develop that podcast. All in all, my feeling is that with Llama, obviously there's some elements which it's really good at. Llama is very good at some of the elements like image generation, text is obviously open source is getting better every time with this community as well, helping them out. And whereas there are other companies which are better perhaps in voice, I mean, OpenAI is very good at inferencing voice, for instance, and voice creation itself. So it's just a matter of time whereby almost every LLM will be at the same level and be really good at it. I don't feel that's a barrier to entry. I feel this is a space where AI is pretty good at it already, and it'll just get better in the coming days.
Yeah, yeah. Now, let's take a step back and talk about AI in general in this context. I mean, AI is prone to hallucinations and making mistakes in the content that it generates. How should creators and listeners approach these tools with that in mind? What kind of safeguards could keep content accurate while still allowing creativity?
Great question. And again, I'll refer back to this podcast I built. The one thing the podcast was doing when it was created was it took some context from the PDF file which I uploaded, and then other bits which were from the internet. So it actually went online and learned about Nepal, and it could give you, and maybe it wasn't online, maybe it's been corpus being the brain or the memory, which is based on the training which has been given. So combining the corpus of the AI and the PDF file, it could generate something very realistic and really good. But the issue is many times it hallucinates or it doesn't know. For example, when someone very famous passes away, it might say they're still alive, for instance, because they just passed away, say, 3 days back or last week, for instance. Or it might get certain data wrong if they are in change of ministers or governments, for instance, as well. So for those bits of data, my recommendation is to use multiple AI tools. When you're developing something which is very essential and it has to be correct, you've got to use multiple AI tools to make sure that the information is correct. And that would require, at the moment at least, API or programming requirements. I mean, using probably Python or LangChain, building your own solutions. It's a bit cumbersome. Again, for small businesses and for the purpose of this podcast, and for talking to SME founders and marketeers, what they have built with Notebook Llama and Notebook LM is really good. Use it off the shelf, you should be okay. But if you're looking for high accuracy and high reliability, you need to get back into doing some programming again. And that means calling not only just, for example, Anthropic or Llama, but actually Llama, Anthropic, and ChatGPT, and verifying everything, and then using a voice technology to generate text to voice.
Yeah, yeah. Or like we discussed in the previous episode, with agents up and coming, maybe there will be an agent that will be able to automate all of that for you.
Absolutely. I think that's going to be a big part of the agents is to kind of go ahead and make sure that you can verify information. So they'll ping multiple LLMs or AI tools for sure.
Awesome. That wraps up our chat about AI-generated podcasts, and we want to know what you think. Would you listen to an AI-created podcast? Potentially you have, and you didn't even know because these tools already exist. Have you listened to an AI-created podcast? Do you prefer the human touch? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast for more insights into the latest tech trends. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.